social economic activist, and has put together a very thoughtful presentation. And I might add that in a recent trip that he and his partner, Didi Devanishta, did to South America, he did do this presentation. So he's had some experience with addressing these crucial topics. And I think we look forward to his presentation this evening. And I think just in passing, and not to make the family feel awkward in any way, but there are a few of us who've had the great pleasure and sometimes the real challenge of raising families that come from a very diverse background themselves. And so some of us have firsthand experience with some of these issues with our own families. And so I applaud him for taking on a very difficult set of challenges within society. And at this point, Prakash, I will turn the evening over to you.
Thank you, John. Can everyone see the slide on the screen? Okay. I'm happy to be here. A little bit nervous because this is such an important topic that has been part of my life for a long time. And I have far more material. And I'm going to be maybe doing a shorter time for presentation and more time for some breakout groups. So people will be able to discuss things and come back and share that. So I think the collective wisdom is important for us to be able to do that. So one of the goals of the Prout philosophy created by PR Sarkar in 1959, and also the spiritual movement that he created, was to establish one human society, and that one human society would be based on universalism. But there's also the recognition, in order to do that, it isn't simply a process of like, oh, we just feel spiritually all connected to everyone and we meditate and then we'll become universalists. No, it was recognizing that we have to overcome all the things that divide humanity, things that are all the forms of oppression and exploitation. And in order to do that spiritual practices are an important part of that, but it cannot be done in isolation or separation from social and economic and political transformation. So one of my favorite quotes from PR Sarkar has been, "You must have a flaming moral purpose so that greed, oppression, and exploitation shrivel before the fire in you." So why do we want to overcome racism and casteism? From the perspective of PR Sarkar, those are absolutely essential to overcome because they are very powerful obstacles on the path of allowing human beings and all living beings to develop their fullest potentials. Their systems of exploitation, oppression, suppression, and repression. And Sarkar, over his lifetime, gave many, many discourses speaking about all forms of exploitation, oppression, etc. And there's sort of two elements. There's the internal and subjective elements of overcoming racism and casteism, and there's the external elements. And the internal elements come from selfishness, basically self-interest run amok. We need to be concerned about our own personal needs, but when selfishness, when it takes that to the extreme and we forget and lose our compassion and caring for others. Also, Sarkar talked a lot about complexes. Complexes are mental constructs in our minds that are very powerful, that in our society propagates those in our families, and it helps us either become ingrained in us or helps us overcome them. And the ones that are particularly relevant to creating universalism and overcoming casteism and racism are superiority and inferiority and fear. Superiority is the idea that we're the chosen, we're better than others, we'll leave other people behind because we are, we're the chosen by God, or chosen by, we're the wealthiest or have the most privileges. And inferiority is feeling like, we are not worthy, feeling worthless. And we have our social and economic systems, and casteism and racism for certain are grounded in maintaining those feelings of inferiority in groups of people and superiority in others. And fear is an important component in that. Materialism is, I won't go over that into great detail because most people here are somewhat familiarity with the idea of Prout and spirituality. But materialism is not recognizing the complexity of human beings and the fact that we are psychic and spiritual, and that spirituality, according to PR Sarkar, is about on a personal human level, is about expanding our minds and our hearts, expansiveness. It's about harmony, flow, moving together with the creation, with others, service, being of service to the creation, to our fellow human beings, and the recognition that we're all seeking, we have this longing for infinite happiness. And dogma is, the core idea of dogma is, don't think beyond this box. If you do, go think outside the box, challenge the system, the questions you're questioning about why are things this way? Why is the system this way? Why am we experiencing this kind of suffering? And dogma challenge says, no, you don't. And we have the answers. Some organization, some institution, some religious body, some scientific body says, this is the way. Don't question this. If you question it, you'll go to hell, or something bad will happen to you. And dogma is based on insecurity and inferiority and fear. So Sarkar looks at all of these things together and say that these things make up what he calls the principle of selfish pleasure, and the polarized opposite of the principle of social equality in humanism, which is the philosophical basis of Prout. And so since many people here have been meditating for a number of years, other people who are maybe not, but they're familiar with the idea of meditation collectively. And this is a song from translation into English from Sanskrit called Song for Collective Meditation, Sankansadwang. And it was composed more than 5,000 BC, thousands of years ago. And the meaning of it is, in English, is, let us move together, let us sing together, let us come to know our minds together, let us share like sages of the past, that all people together may enjoy this universe. Unite our intentions, let our hearts become inseparable. Our minds are as one mind, as we to truly know one another become one. And and this is a song that people sing before meditation. I have been singing the song for 50 years. And according to PR Sarkar, this song or sermon was given thousands of years ago. And this was the inspiration for the creation of the progressive utilization theory. And so moving together, singing together, getting to know our minds together, sharing that all people together may enjoy this universe. These things are all the foundation for spiritual human beings engaging in the world and overcoming all those things that divide us. So what is universalism? According to Sarkar, as people become more generous and broad-minded, they rise above the feelings of casteism, tribalism, provincialism, and nationalism, which evoke narrowness, violence, hatred, and meanness, narrow-mindedness. Those who wish to foster the welfare of living beings as a whole have to embrace universalism as the only alternative. If we look upon everything as our own, the question of mine and yours will dissolve. In universalism, there is no opportunity for violence, hatred, or narrowness. So to create, the goal of PR Sarkar's life was to create the seeds for helping create one human society based on these core ideas of universalism. But to recognize, to do that, we have to transform our social, political, economic systems, ending all kinds of disparities and exploitation. And we need to transform ourselves to become more compassionate, living, loving human beings and connected to all forms of life. So why did I say overcoming casteism and racism? Well, what is the difference between the two? Well, a few years ago, I started reading a book called Caste that came out by Isabel Wilkerson. And we had a study circle. Some of you here might have participated in that, but we spent 8 weeks discussing the core ideas. But what I wanted to say, she talks about how the caste system is based upon differences in people's, well, the caste system has been around for thousands of years, and there's caste systems all over the world. In her book, she talks in great depth about this caste system in India, and she talks about caste system in the Nazi Germany, and its racism, and then racism in the United States, and said that we have a caste system in the United States, and it's based on people's appearances, specifically skin color. And this is an arbitrary manner of differentiating one group from another. That's the concept of race. And without it, race would not carry the importance it does today, or even something we assign meaning to. So the difference between race and caste is race is a line drawn in the sand because it's noticeable. Skin color becomes obvious, and stereotypes can be an assumption built around that. Caste is, one other metaphor she gave was caste is like the bones, and racism is the skin, and class is like the clothing. We can take off the clothing, change our appearance, become wealthier, move into another class. Changing color of our skin is not an option. And casteism is, many times casteism is based on skin color, but many times on other things. You're born into a particular caste, it's your occupation is the work you do. And so our particular form of casteism in the US is racism. And these things get passed on from generation to generation, and creating social inequities and injustice for future generations because we've not challenged that. So this is, according to PR Sarkar in his book on neo-humanism, The Liberation of Intellect, he talked about the principle of selfish pleasure, which rests on dogma, which I talked about briefly before, and that said that the social, economic, and geographical forces that normally motivate human beings are guided by dogma, which is narrowness, fear, insecurity, superiority. And human beings yield to the dogma with the sole intention of attaining selfish pleasures. So they submit to dogma because of self-interest and benefiting. And they surrender our intellect to dogma, and the outcome is very undesirable. And so the whole idea that this selfish pleasure is based upon dogma. It's based upon dogmas grow from selfishness, and then they then become systems that in turn oppress and reinforce all the psychological underpinnings of the selfish pleasure principle. So in the United States, white supremacy is the foundation of racism in the US. So what is the definition of that? Political, economic, and a cultural system which in whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources. Conscious and unconscious ideas of white superiority and entitlement are widespread, and the relations of white dominance and non-white subordination are daily and reenacted across a broad array of institutions and social settings. So you can see this is all about the external disparities why this overwhelming power and control of material resources leads to disparities, tremendous injustice and suffering. And the psychology behind it is superiority and inferiority. Superiority of the dominant white supremacy ideology and in practice, and inferiority of all those who are oppressed, who begin to internalize that oppression, and are feeling overwhelmed by the economic and political and cultural systems that are exploitative. So the opposite of this principle of selfish pleasure is the principle of social equality, which really is the foundation of within Prout, the philosophical foundation for overcoming casteism and racism, both internally and externally. So again, this is coming from a spiritual teacher who saw the whole creation as an expression of one consciousness, and the realization of that one consciousness, which manifests, is expressed as loving love for all beings. It's really it's about happiness. The happiness is about expanding our hearts. We're all moving towards the one, both individually and collectively, but we will not be able to move if we compromise with all the disparities and inequalities of collective life. We should eradicate all these inequalities. At the same time, we move towards our spiritual goal. In fact, so we can't move towards a spiritual goal if we are not working to end the disparities and inequalities that make collective life unbearable for many of us. So the endeavor to advance towards the ultimate reality by forming a society free from all inequalities, with every one of the human race moving in unison, is called Sama Samaj Tattva, the principle of social equality. So that the greatest polarity in our society, in this world, are this fight between the self-interest principle and the principle of social equality, which is both on economic, social, cultural, and spiritual foundation. Wanted to touch briefly. You've often been hearing a lot more in the public discourse about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And the Republicans are now saying how terrible that is because it's like reverse racism, or it's making people feel uncomfortable. But in the philosophy of Prout, and the diversity is the foundational. So diversity, not identity, is the innate characteristic of this expressed universe. No two objects in the universe are identical, nor two bodies, two minds, two molecules, or two atoms. There's a remarkable difference, a wonderful diversity in regard to our appearance, hair, eyes, skin, nose, lips, etc., amongst the inhabitants of different parts of the world. As human beings were not able to unravel the mystery of this diversity, they wrongly preached the doctrine of racial supremacy, resulting in hatred of their fellow human beings and heartless cruelty, savagery, and bloody warfare. These were the darkest and the most lamented chapters in human history. So it begins with diversity and realizes that when you understand that everything in this universe has a uniqueness, the equality is on the level of the love and compassion and acceptance. The diversity is the wide range of all different expressions, and the selfishness based upon self-interest uses diversity to create disparities, and it uses that through imposing dogma of inferiority, superiority, fear, and the manifestation of it in the world is all the disparities. And Sarkar talked about it was the goal of all good people to end all these disparities between male and female, black and white, all indigenous people and all the different forms of disparity we see that have to be challenged and overcome. So again, repeating what I was saying, the expressions of disparities, casteism and racism are experienced as disparities and inequality and all forms of economic and social injustice. And with the short time we have, 1 hour, just touching on some key ideas and Prout philosophy and neo-humanism, I have a great deal to say about all of these things, and I hope to do something, longer course on overcoming casteism and racism and do that together with people. So, and what are the practical solutions for overcoming disparities and injustice? They flow from using positive sentiments. And it's critical, often, sometimes particularly people who are maybe inclined towards or introspective or intuitive, and they tend to look at spirituality as the most important thing in solving problems in the world, is that they make the mistake of thinking that anti-exploitation is a negative sentiment. PR Sarkar says, no, it's actually the most important sentiment in creating social change and a revolution, is identifying all the types of exploitation that are being experienced and working to end those. And it's through the motivation of love, ending the disparities, because humanity is our family, and all the creatures here are our brothers and sisters. And in order to realize that in a practical level, we have to find all the types. The Black Lives Matter is anti-racist. Feminism is against anti-misogyny, anti-male dominance, male supremacy. So all these movements, but what we want to add to them is the moral, cultural, universal, and spiritual movements that say, yes, we overcome these disparities and this exploitation, we fight against that, and we expand our hearts and minds. So, first we're struggling with the injustice we might feel in our family or in our community, and then as we find ways of dealing with that, we begin to expand. And of course, the principle of social equality, humanism, which I talked about, and Prout. I'm not going to go into great depth because I'm going to take some more time for breaking out. So the breakout sessions, I'll do something a little different. I want to create, there's 4 breakout sessions, and it will take 15 minutes. And I want, people to choose one of these 4. And one is about overcoming superiority, inferiority, and fear complexes. How have we been impacted by these? And what practices or strategies have we learned to overcome them? Second breakout session would be discussing disparities. How have they impacted us most powerfully? What ideas or movements have been most inspiring to us? 3 is white supremacy. How have we dealt with this in our families and communities? Diversity. And fourthly, diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do they mean to us? So I'm going to create breakout groups. Any questions? It'll take about 15 minutes. Do you think this is enough? It's like 14 of us. Three people or so in each group. And then we'll take 15 minutes discussing it, and then one person will come back and we'll share that. And then I'll have some more things to share after we do that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to have 4 breakout groups.
Prakash, will you assign, or
I'm going to, people can choose.
Okay.
So the first one, I'm just calling complexes. Second one, I'm going to call disparities. Third one, white supremacy. And the fourth one, diversity, equity, and inclusive. Okay. So I'm going to open the rooms and then you can pick one. If you have difficulty, I can assign people, but right, we go.
A lot of the disparity, you can get a lot of funding to address a lot of the disparities, but it's all about lifting people out of the communities rather than making the communities more effective at addressing their issues. And so if the community itself continues to exist with a lack of efficacy, then really the caste continues to exist. And people are seeming to have mobility, but there is no, but the reality of what I'll call the caste continues to exist because of a lack of community efficacy. And so people don't address that community, the lack of community efficacy. And that's why we meet everything 20 years later. Each generation meets it over. And that's been one of the main goals, is to take away community efficacy. After the Civil War, there was potential community efficacy on the part of African Americans. And that community efficacy was systematically destroyed. And then they said, you can assimilate, you can gain some economic power, you can overcome some of these disparities, and we'll give you that if we can lift you out of the community and you can identify with the white supremacy culture. So the biggest disparity for me is the lack of community efficacy.
That reminds me of something. So I'm in Maine, and Maine is more than 95% white people. And so there is no diversity in Maine. The intersection of where I've experienced this topic is with different economic classes, and not seeing large groups of people dependent on systems of support. Otherwise, they go without.
That it was a young woman that went through a medical school. And early in her medical school career, she actually wrote a novel. I can't imagine people having the capacity to go through medical school and do things like that. But she set it aside and eventually, went through, finished medical school, residency, fellowship, and everything, went into practice. And she had a chance to go back and look at that draft and ended up publishing it. I mean, cleaned it up and found a publisher. And what I listened to was an interview of someone talking with her. And the question was, where do you as physicians come from? Because there's always sort of, I'm someone that's been in the healthcare industry for years, and casteism is alive and well in healthcare. And, and they actually teach that. How do you dominate patients? How do you sort of force your way through? And she said part of it was self-preservation. In other words, you're dealing with just life horrendous issues with patients. And if you take it all home with you, you just come apart at the seams. But she said it started her thinking about, and she said what was beneficial is it was like seeing her as the altruistic young med student. And now years later, as a sort of hardened, practitioner that was sort of insulating herself from that emotional interaction with people. And so, and I'll get to the point, she said, so she really struggled with, because the interviewer was asking about, how do you have the power? And what she finally came to that I thought was a great insight is that power is the reality of not having barriers. In other words, you can do whatever you want. Like as a physician, you're God. You can say, order, whatever. And I think that's the reality of, a classist, racist, casteist system, is some people have no barriers. And Dada and I are probably at the ultimate level of that. If you're a white male in America, there's just nothing that says no to you. And so I think and she realized, this young doctor realized that it's such a subtle thing.
Is she white?
Yeah, she was. Yeah, exactly. And and just realized that no one's saying no to me.
Do you
and I think
a doctor who was not white would have the same power?
in a patient physician relationship, they tend to. Yeah.
Okay.
But
okay. Yeah.
But I think there are so many Indian physicians, FMGs, we call them, foreign medical school graduates, that come and do residencies and fellowships and stay. And I think they go through some challenges.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's insidious in its, if you benefit from it, it's invisible in large part to you.
Right.
And you're only acutely aware of it if you're not in the in club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
What do FMG stand for?
Foreign medical graduates.
Right.
In other words,
I have a friend who I worked with at the last company I worked for who is Indian. He came from a scheduled caste and a lower caste, and brilliant guy. And there were companies that would have been much closer to his home that he refused to even consider. He commuted for a while. He found a job closer to home eventually. He commuted for a while, 75 miles, because the competitor that was close to him, same kind of job, he knew that there were Indians there who would discriminate against him. They brought their caste system with them from India and would discriminate against him. And I was just like shocked and appalled. It was just, wow. So,
yeah.
what
Well, and
Hey, wait a minute, we have our own caste systems over here. We don't need you to bring yours. Please leave them behind.
yeah, deposited at the entrance. Yeah,
I didn't want to talk about. So, those are some issues that I have been dealing with.
Yes, Prakash mentioned about casteism, particularly in this country where it's from mostly based on color. But yeah, in ethnic communities, they would have their own expressions of it, like
Yeah,
casteism.
yeah.
Mhm.
And in India today, it's a huge problem. And of course, Modi, with his Hindutva, radical Hindu philosophy, is just feeding into that, trying to control it by this Hindu-centric Brahmin superiority complex.
Mhm.
And it's affecting the whole yoga community in strange ways. Yeah. Now we understand why Baba got in so much trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one reason. He didn't want to have anything to do with that, and they did. Yeah. What about you, Wilder?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting more. I feel like I struggle with both superiority and inferiority complexes with my indigenous heritage, and where I feel both proud of and also like I don't deserve to like participate in the culture and the traditions because I'm not full Native American or Haudenosaunee. So those are things that I'm just beginning to more like grapple with and try to comprehend.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
That's very interesting. I've heard about that, but you're the first real person I hear articulating it. I've read about it. I've heard people talking about it in documentaries. Yeah, that you're both proud of it, but then on the other hand, you're not enough of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And some natives, they have a kind of superiority over people like you. And that's very interesting. These are so deep rooted in us as human beings, these psychologies, and it is projected in society, in communities, in organizations, even in Ananda Marga we see it. The Brahmin acharyas and the non-Brahmin, and Indians versus Westerners. And, you can never be enough of a devotee because you're from the West. You don't understand what true bhakti is all about. I've heard that many times.
Yeah. I had a lot of that kind of a complex in the 70s and 80s and 90s. But I did notice that as I started to age and become more senior, that I seem to get more respect from Indian people of across the board. The seniors and the juniors respected me more noticeably, very, very starkly different from when I was young. Now, I don't know how much of that is has to do with if there's a whole nother aspect of culture behind that, or I mean, nationality. But I did notice that, but of course, Indian society they do give respect to age, and I noticed they gave that to me
Yeah.
when I aged.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's true.
A reminder to have someone in the group report?
Okay, I didn't take any notes. But did anybody take any notes? Or?
Not written, no. Okay, 1 minute to go. All right. Well, I can present, share what we talked about, and if anything important that you think I left out, any of you just step in and fill it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We just had 3 groups. We had one, we didn't have anyone join the group on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we had one on the complexes, one on disparities, and one on white supremacy. Can we begin with the one on disparities? Would someone like to share from that group?
Yeah, I can share on that group. It was really interesting because 2 of the people in our group, were able to talk about really personal disparities they experienced in terms of resources as a single mother, and also professional resources as disparities in resources as professionals. And and I could and I was thinking of disparities in what I call community efficacy. And I think that the one reason that we have individuals facing these disparities professionally and as individuals trying to make a way in life is because there is a system in place that keeps communities ineffective at marginalized communities at addressing the issues that affect them in the context of capitalism and exploitation. And one of our speakers pointed out that how even as activists, we will tend to address those disparities that affect individuals in the immediate because we have to, because people need to have those disparities met in terms of, meeting basic needs. But I believe that distracts us sometimes from addressing this lack of community efficacy that we really need to build up to be able to truly address um, these individual disparities. And the system actually it goes back to our topic, casteism. I think the way you maintain marginalized groups and maintain caste is by having so-called upward mobility that may tend to lift individuals out, but at the same time maintain the caste by creating a lack of community efficacy. So I think in our discussion, looking at the ways that we as professionals and as individuals trying to make a way in life experience the diversity, experience these disparities, and also as activists addressing primarily individual needs and whatnot, that we have to think of some way that we can address more how communities as a whole can become more effective in the context of capitalism if we're going to create any long-term change.
Thank you, Japa. Does anyone else from that group want to add anything to that? Okay, can we hear someone from the group on white supremacy?
Okay, that's me. Okay, so our group was Dada and Jitendra, and the first thing we talked about was I mentioned that when I was still working, I had a coworker who's Chinese, and one day, and we were pretty good friends. We were good friends. We talked a lot, and one day she asked me why she's a hyphen, why she's Chinese American, and I wasn't, and I don't have a hyphen, and I really couldn't articulate. I wasn't really, I didn't really know what that could be, and I didn't know what to say until George Floyd summer, when after that horrific event, the murder, that I was involved, like everybody I know was involved in a lot of reading and consciousness and raising and study groups and so on. And I realized, well, I just was unable to name the white supremacy that underlies why she's a hyphen and why I'm just the default and I don't need a hyphen. It's certainly not a part of my identity to say that I'm Irish American. It's just irrelevant to me. Jitendra discussed how casteism is alive and well in healthcare, and how to dominate patients is actually something that doctors are taught. And one doctor that he knew, in light of this, she really started thinking about the power. And power is the reality of not having barriers. And that's like a basis of white supremacy, is to just not have barriers that Black people and people of color have in this country. He also worked with foreign medical graduates, a lot of Indian doctors, and I also worked with somebody who was Indian from a scheduled caste, a lower caste, and he didn't want to work at certain companies because he knew that there were upper caste Indians in those companies that would treat him badly. And that's the first I had heard of that. And I was just beyond shocked that that was happening. But Dada mentioned that at Google Corporation, when they were going to have discussion about casteism and these kinds of issues, the upper caste Indians nuked it, didn't allow it to happen. And I'm like, well, why? But it's because of, like Brahmin fragility, that they just didn't want to deal with their privilege. And so we know that for white people, that unpacking white supremacy is a lifetime endeavor.
Thank you, Natalie. Okay, and from the group on complexes, someone like to share? Carl?
Sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
Yes, we discussed on a variety of issues around complexes, psychic complexes like superiority or inferiority, and sometimes it expresses both. Like, for example, but at different times. For example, one brought up that for like Native Americans or people, indigenous Americans of a particular tribe, maybe they are not full-blooded and they have like a superiority complex about having their cultural cultural identity, but then inferiority because they're not full-blooded as some of the some of the peers are. And so those kinds of sentiments lurking. And then we discussed also some of the challenges, like in family life, how one partner can come from a perspective of being more intellectual, and other can come from the heart, and how to bridge the communication gaps between them, and also methods to like mindfully to be able to have awareness, to be able to notice what sentiments are in our minds at a given moment, particularly in a moment of tension or challenge, and that can help us work through whatever the issue is. Like if I'm feeling inferior, I can notice that. Or if I'm feeling superior, I can notice that, and then that can help me to tone down the impact or the way that expresses in me, to come to a more balanced position of meeting the other person, the other people in a relationship of mutual respect. So these are some of the things that we talked about. Anything else to add from the other participants? That was Ramesh and Wilder, and Chitra was also there, but was not participating in the conversation. So not much. Back to you, Prakash.
Thank you. Okay. I have one last slide, and then time for some questions, and particularly if people have ideas of what some next steps might be for us to go in some depth. Building anything on humanistic lines requires a foundation of real love for humanity. A truly benevolent society will never come into being under the leadership of those who are solely concerned with profit and loss. Where love is paramount, the question of personal loss or gain does not arise. The basic ingredient for building a healthy society is simply love. Sri Sri Anandamurti or PR Sarkar. So, questions people have, and this is again just scratching the surface. The last time I was doing a presentation, it was part of an 8 or 10 session class online, so, or a 2-hour presentation. So this is a much shorter time period. But other thoughts about or questions about what I'm sharing tonight, or what you heard? Devaki.
Mine is more, where do we go from here? So I'll save that till the end if you want me to.
Well, you can start to say something about it now if you have.
Okay. I just, was in the group with Japa, Mahajoy, and Ananta on disparities.
Right.
And it was a great discussion, and I would love to be part of an ongoing group. And it was really a rich discussion, and we're in different locales. And I think having a study group or some ongoing work on this topic, Prakash, would be so wonderful. And then maybe we could apply it in our communities, and in some way, or in some specific work that we're doing, either for a living or volunteer work, and then we could report back to that study group, how that's going and what impact we see it having and what the challenges are.
Gosh, can you stop sharing so we can see everybody? Please.
Oh, yes. Yes, here we go. All right. Thank you. If you're interested in participating in an ongoing group, please put your your contact name and email in the chat. But I'm interested in also if you have ideas of what there's such vast material on this, and if people have a sense of like they like to focus on a particular book or a particular theme or something, interactive.
There's a delicate balance between an ideological approach to this and finding a harmony along with that ideological approach to at least an equal focus on addressing material disparities. So a lot of what we see in the social justice spheres now is a pivot heavily into ideological approaches and somewhat taking several steps back from focusing on concrete addressing of real material disparity. And that's unfortunate, but it's how it is. And with a lot of this work, by the same token, the ideological approach of understanding, complex topics for diverse organizations such as white supremacy, it's and inclusivity and the predominance of kind of educated people or middle-class people in conversations. Those are very complex topics as well to understand, but I find some of that ends that discussion can even dominate the focus and take the focus away from really concrete plans to address material conditions. So I just want to point that out.
All right, thank you. Well, Majoy.
Yeah. Oh.
You want to unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, this is funny because Ananta, you said something that was like the exact opposite of what I was going to say, but I hear you and I think that's right. But what I was going to say is what I was saying in my group is wanting to talk about the pleasure part about white supremacy. And I think it fits into all other oppressions and oppressive thoughts, which goes more to an individual idea, which is something that I critique of a lot of anti-racist workshops and stuff, is the focus on the individual psyche. So it's funny I'm saying this right now, but I think it would be interesting to talk about how Baba talks about finite pleasure, infinite pleasure, and how attraction to this white supremacy, it's in all of us, and it's also a psychic pleasure towards something that you shouldn't have pleasure towards. And so I think it'd be interesting to talk about how we've become, all of us, sort of addicted to white supremacy, and it is a mental thing, but then of course it turns into that was an excuse for the material supremacy. Yeah, I do agree though, we need to do all of it. So it's just one, I think it's making it really small, which has its downsides, but that was piquing my interest from this talk.
Thank you, Marjorie. John.
Yeah, I think one thing you'd mentioned, Caste, the book, and I think there's been a great interview or article with her and about some of her work. I don't know if that would be a good starting place, to maybe have a book that everyone is going through and having meetings and discussions would be a way to kind of along the lines of what Nina was suggesting. But I think many of us would be open to that and an opportunity to really delve into not only the realities, but what are the real solutions and the practical approaches, kind of some of the things that Alex was touching on, because they are very material and real, and just understanding it is only part of addressing it. But again, I think Prakash's suggestion, maybe listing your address in the chat, and we'll save that, and we can reach out to people. And I would suggest that if there is interest in doing this, that we can reach out to even people that weren't able to attend this session and just see how widespread the interest would be, across a number of contact lists that I think many of us work with. because I think it could be very positive, productive effort.
Okay, any other final questions or thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention this book, and I wrote it down in the chat. The Trauma of Caste by Tanmosi Sundararajan, an Indian Dalit. In India, the Dalit comprises 150 million people. They're the casteless. So they're at the bottom of the totem pole in the caste system in India. And she was the one that was hired by Google to speak, but was turned down because the upper caste Brahmins within Google protested because they didn't want to have discussions about caste. And one of the higher ups who had a little more of a universal understanding left the company because of this situation. My wife is from South India, and South Indians are darker skinned, and she works a couple of days in a public area, and she feels it from upper caste Indians. So this is a very hot potato topic in India, and it has infiltrated the Western yoga community, where there's a lot of confusion because Modi, the Prime Minister of India, is presenting, yoga as this wonderful thing, and then underneath it all, he has this very fascist government policy, discrimination against lower castes and Muslims and so on. And so Western yogis have difficulty talking about it because the Indians don't want to talk about it because they want to shove it under the rug. And learning about this firsthand has made me realize one of the reasons why Baba was in prison, because he was non-compromising when it came to caste and so on. And that was one of the reasons why they wanted to get rid of him. But I think this is a human universal problem, this issue of color and caste, and it's endemic to every society. So this is a very important topic.
Okay. All right. Any last chance?
Well, and again, we want to be sensitive. We appreciate that people stayed a little bit past, but I think this has just been a vitally important topic, and one that I think we need to revisit in some capacity in the future. And I noticed that some of you are indicating interest, and again, we'll reach out at a broader level if it looks like we can organize something like. I think the book that Ramesh mentioned sounds very interesting as well. But there's a lot of material on it, and I would trust some of you who've gone through some of these different references and see that they have some real balance and a judgment about how to approach it. We can trust the collective wisdom because many of us try to stay abreast of some of these issues, and some folks have had an opportunity to go through some of these great books or articles or documentaries, and I think setting up some way to share that and engage in conversation about that would be a very positive thing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and look forward, and I'll try to follow up and send out link to the video and some of the other materials that we've been using in some of our other study circles.
And thank you, Prakash. I admire your bravery. This is a very touchy, difficult topic that we need to spend more time understanding and working with. And so thank you for taking this on. It was much appreciated.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Awesome.